Super excited to take it, guys. I've got Netta, and instead of a formal introduction, I want you, if you don't mind, Netta, to share the turning point when you realized true leadership is about awakening inner strength rather than chasing like so many people with these titles and external accolades.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, thanks for having me first off, Jason, on the podcast. So I have a lot of stories to tell you the truth, but let me take it back to the first story that I can remember that I did my TED Talk on, and I also write about it in my book, is really understanding what leadership looks like and how important it is for you as an individual to have the self-awareness and capacity to even be able to like lead anybody else. And it goes all the way back to when I was 19 years old. So I actually used to be a performer, Jason. I used to tour internationally around the world and do musical theater and singing and dancing. And I remember one time I was invited to, with a cast of about like 30, to perform at a mansion in Malibu. So I'm super excited. I got casted to do the show. I'm driving up Malibu, getting ready, practicing my songs. And then I get there. And if you know anything about performing, you walk your show. So even though you've done the show 1,000 times, every space is different dimensions, different microphones. So you have to like kind of walk your show before you actually perform it. And I remember we were walking our show and the director just stopped everything and started screaming. And there was a young man that was in the middle of the stage and she said, "Stop, wear your shoes." And this young man wasn't wearing shoes and he was like one of the main dancers. So he said, I forgot on my clothes, which, as you know, is like, you're a performer, you forgot your shoes, you're in tap dancing, that's a big no-no. So she continued to reprimand him on stage and said, if you don't find your shoes or if you don't get shoes in the next hour, we're going to cut you from the show. Now, I knew, and the rest of the cast knew, that if she cut him from the show, it was going to put more stress and strain on us as a team because we would need to fill that hole. That means that we would all need to change our positions. Some of us would have to relearn choreography. Like we would have to basically start over in a short amount of time. And so we went to the green room. We took a break. I remember walking into the green room and I'm like getting my makeup on and getting ready. And the CEO of the company walked into the green room and I became a kid at a candy shop. I'm like, what's about to happen? He's going to get like completely destroyed. You know, I was immature back then. And the CEO walks up to the young man. He puts his hand on his shoulders. He bends down. He takes his shoes off. He gives them to the young man to perform in. And for the next 4 hours, he walked around barefoot with the rest of the CEOs at the Malibu mansion. And that changed my life. Like I ended up being with that organization for 15 years in some way, shape, or form, whether it was full-time, volunteering, whatever it was. I stayed with them for 15 years. I'm getting married in a month and a half. They're coming to my wedding after like 20 years of knowing them. And my whole lens of leadership shifted on that day because it was one simple sign or behavior that showed me that like, this is not about you. And that's where that self-awareness comes into, right? It's like being able to shed the ego away from being the leader and recognizing that there's a bigger picture. And sometimes as leaders, and I've been caught in this trap before, where I make it about me. Well, I'm the boss and I said this, and this is how we do things. And it clouds our ability to have empathy and to see like, what do we need to do to help serve the big picture of like what's happening in that moment. And that really changed my life forever. And that's kind of what I go back to. And you know what the most interesting thing about that, Jason, is? Till this day, the CEO, his name is Bill, does not remember doing that. Like totally
This is his natural act. Yeah.
Right? Exactly. Like changed my life on leadership, got me to, where I am today. And he's like, "Oh, I did that?" I'm like, "Yeah." He had no recollection.
That's awesome. And it's like a form of humility. And you mentioned ego. And I think this is really important when it comes to self-awareness. And I want you to talk about this. We have this idea and we're so narcissistic because everything is fed to us for me, 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 me. Whether it's social media or whatever it may be, everything, even it's getting hyper personalized with advertising and marketing. So we have this whole desire to elevate ourselves, whether it's in an Instagram, whatever it may be. How as a leader, like something like that, taking your shoes off, how do you get past the ego side of things and become more self-aware where you don't even think about it and you're more than happy to give your shoes to somebody?
Great question. And my answer to you is self-confidence. See, what happens is that the majority of individuals, whether you're a leader or not, they struggle with feeling enough and they struggle with self-confidence. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
83. So my team and I at Rise Up For You, every single year, we ask not hundreds, not 1,000, not 2,000, but we ask anywhere between 4,000 to 5,000 professionals every year what their number one challenge is in the workplace. 83% consecutively over the last 5 years have said self-confidence. So what happens is that when you're a leader and you struggle with self-confidence, it impacts your capacity to lead and communicate at a heightened level. Because now what happens is, let's say a team member does something, or let's say a team member is disrespectful. Instead of you being able to look at it from a lens of, how can I serve you and what's really happening? We look at it from a lens of like, how dare you hurt my feelings? Or I'm doing the best I can as a leader. Like, our self-doubt and our enoughism is what comes in, and then we behave based off of that.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. That's the, and I always talked about, because I'm pretty open about this. In my personal life, it's always like, I've never been good enough. And it's good fuel in the sense of it got me to where I'm at, but it's dirty fuel.
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
I've never been the leader that I should have been. I feel like I'm, learning and getting better and being more self-aware, but I always was like the taskmaster, go, go, go 7 days a week. Like, why are you not working the 13th hour today?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
type of thing. But behind, I didn't even realize it, but behind this was like, you're never good enough. You're never good enough. You're never
Yeah.
good enough. How do you shift that mindset? Because that's what you're talking about when you talk
Yeah.
about confidence.
Yeah.
And how can emerging leaders adopt it?
So the first thing I would say is that we need to do a self-awareness check. We need to do an accurate self-assessment check. So, I talk a lot about emotional intelligence as it relates to leadership and as it relates to everything in life. Emotional intelligence is the number one skill that we need as professionals, leaders, parents, you name it. Like, if you want to be in the top 10 or 15% as a human, not just as a professional, master emotional intelligence, because it'll change your life. And that first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And under that first pillar is exactly what we're talking about. Self-confidence exists under it, emotional awareness, and accurate self-assessment. So now imagine a tree, you have emotional intelligence, and one of the big branches is self-awareness, okay? And then the leaves that are coming off of self-awareness are self-confidence, accurate self-assessment, and emotional awareness. Now, in order for anybody to create change, they have to have a true assessment of what needs changing, right? So we say, like, first thing we should do is get some feedback around who we are and how we show up. So for example, Jason, when I was 27, I became the executive of an education corporation. I was quite young. I had about 200 team members under me. I thought I was the most amazing leader ever. I was like, I'm the best. Like, I have an open door policy. I'm young. I'm cool. Like, I know what I'm doing, blah, 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 right? The ego. But nobody came into my office. Nobody would come and talk to me. I wanted to coach. I wanted to make an impact with my team, but I could tell that people didn't feel safe and I didn't know why. And then one day somebody said, well, you're kind of intimidating. And I said, that's not true.
Right.
I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not intimidating. That's your belief, not mine. And then like a week later, another person said, well, you're kind of intimidating. And I said, no. And then a week went by and another person was like, well, sometimes it's uncomfortable to come in your room. Like, it's hard to relate. And I'm like, okay, you got 3 people that are coming to you. My perception is not accurate, right? So then I decided to do a survey, an anonymous survey. I was the only executive that had the bravery to do it. Everybody else opted out. So we did an anonymous survey and I pretty much put myself on the chopping block. And you would not believe 75% out of 200 people said I was intimidating, not relatable, and I looked mad all the time. Okay. So
That sounds so familiar.
Yeah, right. And so I was devastated.
Right. Can imagine.
And I
Yes.
was crying and my mom was like, what is wrong with you? But I was 27. So like, it was just it was overwhelming to be like, nobody likes me, like that's kind of the feeling that I had. But then after I got through my emotions, I was really grateful because I understood exactly what needed shifting. So now as a leader, I was like, okay, I understand that I'm really technically advanced in education and what we were doing. Like, I knew my stuff. I helped the school get through accreditation. I'm confident. I'm assertive. but I'm not relatable and I'm not showing a lot of empathy, and there's creating a wall. So I knew exactly like where I needed to work. And from there, I was able to start working on that area
How
specifically.
did you, I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is really important because I want people to understand this. Both
Yeah.
times you had epiphanies based off of the answers. A lot of people will double down on their ego, and instead you made shifts. Like you're like, no, I'm going to pivot and go this way. I'm going to do, like both times when
Yeah.
you had those, and those, that's self-awareness to be able to have that realization. Did you always have that? Like at 27, how were you already being self-aware?
Well, I don't know if it was self-aware as much as like I kept hearing the same thing. Here's the thing. If you keep hearing the same thing about yourself and you're in constant denial, that's a red flag. So after the third time that I heard like you're intimidating, I was like, and I also heard it a lot when I was a performer, right? But when I was a performer, I didn't care. I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to get on stage and like crush it. You know what I mean? Like
Right. Yeah,
there's,
exactly. Yeah.
there's a competitive edge that you have when you're performing. But now I'm in the workplace and I have 200 people under me and I'm hearing the same thing. And I'm like, that's not going to work here. You know what I mean? Like people they're not going to come with me with my vision if this isn't a competitive landscape. You know, I'm here to like lead and support people. So after hearing it a couple of times, that's when I was like, you know what? Data doesn't lie. That's the thing. Everyone listening, data does not lie. So that's why I put myself on the chopping block, is because I really needed to know what was true and what wasn't true. And so when 75% of the people said that, I couldn't argue with it. No matter how strong my ego is, the data shows that 75% of the people feel this way, and numbers don't lie. So that means that like, no matter what, whether I like it or not, I was forced to make a shift because it's clear that there's something that's being blocked between me and being able to create the transformation that I wanted to as a leader. And for anyone that's listening out there, it's important that you have something that's bigger than you, that you're willing to change for. And so for me as a leader, I always cared about like pushing people's potential and transformation. And I never let anything get in the way of that, including my ego. So if I have all this data that's telling me that I'm not relatable and intimidating, well, at the end of the day, this is my bigger vision and that's my goal. So then I need to create the shifts to make that happen.
That's so good. Yeah. And self-doubt, because this is really good in our industry, in the tech industry. We have a lot of engineers, like Mark Zuckerberg's an engineer. Now
Yeah,
he's a
A-brain.
CEO, Meta.
A-brain.
Yeah. So how do you like, and I know this is a lot in your coaching. We'll have those in the show notes so everybody can hop on there on your website and stuff. And we'll get in a little bit more into that. But if you're like an engineer type person, passive aggressive, not very, because who you are and I am, we're kind of, seems like kind of the same. I have the same exact things people have told me in past. So I was in the Marine Corps, like all that stuff. So when you're dealing with millennials and younger type, and they're saying they can't relate, and then you're this engineer and you're just passive aggressive because you're hoping that work gets done, but you don't hold anybody accountable. There's no coaching. How do you see that? Like, how does that play out with self-doubt and confidence?
On which side? On the receiver
Well, I
or
mean,
on
on
the
the
leader?
leader side,
Yeah.
yeah. Like I want to be practical here and help
Yeah.
leaders.
So, okay, I'm going to say something that may come across a little bit harsh, but it's
I
the
love it though.
reality.
Yeah, let's go.
It's the reality because like the thing is that my team and I are in the trenches every day, and so everything that we talk about is like we're living day to day to day with everything from like oil companies to big tech to healthcare. So like we're in it, and we've worked with every type of brain, right? We've worked with the
Mm-hmm.
engineer brain, we've worked with the more creative brain, we've seen it, and like the biggest thing that I always tell people is, if you're not ready to create a shift in yourself, don't become a leader. Don't become a leader. And what happens is that, and we see this all the time. We work with leaders that are like, well, I don't want to lead people. And then it's like, well, then you should get rid of that salary that they gave you and you should go back to being entry level or go back to being like a lower position, because the second you said yes to being a leader and that salary, you signed yourself up for a commitment to create change with your team. And what we see is a lot of people that are like, well, I want the title and I want the salary, but like, I'm not going to do the work as a leader to empower and engage my team. And that does not work. And we have a lot of those harsh conversations with leaders because they're like, well, why do I have to coach and why do I have to mentor? It's like, well, you accepted the leadership position And that's what leaders do. Most of your role as a leader is to lead through inspiration, transformation, navigating your teams to a certain destination, uplifting your team, building a succession plan of the next leaders. It's not to sit at your desk with the door closed and then just like hoping that they figure it out and then come out every now and then and like reprimand them when they don't get things done. That's not leadership. And so if you're a leader and you're struggling to do that, you need to have a hard look at yourself and you need to get some work. Like you need to invest in your soft skills. You need to invest in your ability to communicate assertively. Passive aggressive communication is proven to be the worst style of communication in marriages and in the workplace because it's kind of like stabbing somebody in the back. It's like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. And then underneath you give a little dig and then like a negating comment might come out in a meeting or then there's like gossiping underneath the breath. And it does a lot of damage and mistrust in organizations when somebody is passive aggressive. So it's
I love that. Yeah.
yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, no, I was just going to say, and so it's really important that as leaders, we work and up level our skill. And I think the best way to start doing that is by doing a true assessment of yourself so that you can look at what your strengths are and so that you can look at where you need to grow. Like I know for me, I do this with myself, Jason. Again, everything we talk about, we do here at the company. So even though I'm the owner of the company and I'm the CEO, we have about 20 team members. Every year, sometimes twice, we'll do an assessment and I'll do it anonymously. So my team's like not worried about it. And I get back the assessment of how my team feels about like my leadership and, you know, what I'm doing. And every year I score through the roof when it comes to self-awareness. Like my confidence, they give me 10s. Communication, they give like it's really high. The area that I always struggle with, but it's getting better, is empathy and active listening, right? Which is a pretty common area for a business owner. Because usually when you're a business owner, you're wired differently when it comes to performing and you just like drive, right? Like your pace is faster. So, but now that helps me. It helps me realize, okay, I'm not going to go get a coach on confidence. Like I'm not going to go invest in these areas that I'm strong at. But I do need to pay attention and I do need to invest in myself when it comes to being an active listener. I need to put some things in place to help me just be more present when a team is talking to me. I do need to try to like look at the lens from a more empathetic standpoint. That doesn't mean get rid of standards, but that just means doing my best to try to understand where the team member is coming from because those are the areas that are the lowest right now.
Yeah. Do you see, that's awesome. Do you see like, because there's a lot of bullshit in the sense of leaders that are alpha, really strong, moving forward, you know, the power suit on, the power stances, you got to pose this way, got to do this. And a lot of people that, whether they went up through sales and they were just that lone wolf that was a badass, and then next thing you know, they're in a leadership position.
Yeah.
And then we have this other opposite side, the yin and the yang, the other opposite side of, you know, the passive aggressive, super techie engineer that, you know, he was the badass engineer, so he just got the position. How do you, and I know this is what your programs are geared for, but how do you start somebody off that just hits a leadership position? Is it like, okay, now that you accepted and said yes, now it's just a whole, let's work on you? How do you go over these challenges and then create empowerment within?
And we have to start with the self first. So like, for example, we start with self-leadership first, okay? Then we go to like team leadership. And then we go to community leadership because most people that are in a leadership role, it doesn't stop in the workplace. Like typically they're also out in the community. They're talking with stakeholders, with investors, you know what I mean? So there's always that third level. That's the highest level. But the first thing we have to do, Jason, is start with the self. And that's a really big misconception with leadership because we're dealing with it right now with one of our companies. We have somebody that the company has put them in coaching, one-to-one coaching. And the leader's like, I'm not doing coaching. No way. They don't want to do, they're like, no. And they're leading a team, but they're like, no, I'll watch the training. I'll do the training, but there's no way that I'm going to do coaching. And so we had to have a tough conversation with the company and say, just so you know, if this individual is not ready to do the one-to-one coaching, but they're expecting their team to do the one-to-one coaching, what they are, that the next level is also getting one-to-one coaching, there's going to be a big gap that happens. And that gap is not going to be good because what's going to happen is the team is going to become more evolved through their transformational one-to-one coaching. And the leader who is refusing to do the work is going to end up like creating a gap between him and the team. And they're going to become smarter than the leader. You see?
Mm-hmm.
And so this we always have to start with the self. We need to start with the accurate self-assessment, like where should we work on? Like what should we work on? The self-confidence is really the biggest thing because most people behave based off of their beliefs, including leaders. The way that they communicate, the way that they behave with their team, the passive aggressiveness, the aggressiveness, all of those are behaviors that are based off of belief constructs that they've built over time, starting from when they were a child. So
Well, let's go.
before,
Let's go into that. That's really good.
yeah,
The
yeah,
beliefs,
yeah,
because that's what's screwing people up.
yeah,
You nailed it. I mean, 100% with me. Once I started understanding, EQ, self awareness, all that, and began to really study it, it was like, oh, it was this when I was a kid. Oh, it was the way, my mom. Well, she's great, but she was very hard on me. Entrepreneurial type. So it was like I'm never good enough. How do you coach that to new leaders or with leaders? How do they begin those processes to understand the false beliefs?
yeah. So I'll have a strategy I'll share with you here. But before I do that, I want to remind people that when you have this belief structure and system, all of your behaviors are dictated through that lens. And I remember, I'll give you a quick example because I think personal stories are always add that extra level. When I was an executive, I remember we being in a meeting one time and I was up in front and I was telling the team like these directions, like we're making some changes, blah, 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 blah. And I had somebody raise their hand that was older than me, much older. And they were like, why are we doing that? And I just like literally ripped their head off verbally. I was like, because I'm the leader, I said so. This is what we're doing. Stop asking questions, blah, 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 blah. No wonder they thought I was intimidating. And then I realized
Plus, you
after,
could dance better than them, right?
yeah, right, because
Yeah.
so
So
then,
that's intimidating.
but I went back and I was like, I don't really like that I responded that way. But because I was growing in my self-awareness, I was able to coach myself through that behavior. So I realized that behavior was not a good behavior. So then I went back and I was like, I don't like that behavior, that I basically like reprimanded this person and got like more than assertive. I wouldn't say aggressive, but I was pretty dominant. That's not a good behavior. Why do I have that behavior? I was able to coach myself backwards. What's the belief? And then my belief was, well, they're negating me. They don't trust me. I'm younger, so they think that I don't know what I'm doing. But all of those beliefs were made up. Like nobody told me you're too young to be an executive. Nobody told me I don't trust you. That's just what the narrative that I created in my head, my belief narrative. And then I behaved based off of that narrative that I created, right? So I reversed engineer all that. And then the next time it happened and somebody asked the question, I said, that's a really good question. Let me provide a little bit more insight. And it was like a completely different feeling, a different energy. People nodded. They were like, oh, that makes sense. So instead of me thinking that they're trying to attack me, my thought was, well, maybe they just need more information. And the whole landscape changed. So the way that we do that here, this is I'll give you like probably one of the most powerful strategies that we can utilize, but it's not easy. It's not cookie cutter. It's not, quick fix because that's not how it is. I say that soft skills, emotional intelligence, building confidence, it's exactly comparable to going to the gym. Okay. You can go to the gym for 8 hours in a day and train for 8 hours straight. And you're like, I got the best workout ever, but it's not sustainable and you're not going to see results. You're just going to be really fatigued. You're going to be fatigued that day, right? It's the exact same thing when learning these skills. People think like, let's do an 8-hour leadership retreat and then like not address it again for another year. It's like, it's not going to create the shift that you want to see. So with this example and this strategy I'm going to give you, you need to do it like consistently so that you can start to coach yourself. It's called the 4 B's to reverse engineering. Okay, reverse engineering your thoughts. So when you have like silence and presence, I want you to ask yourself, what's one limiting belief? Just one. We all have like thousands, but what's one limiting belief that you have that's getting in the way of your success? Like it's stopping you from moving forward. Okay. For some people, it's nobody listens to me because I'm too young. For some people, it's if I say no and create healthy boundaries, people aren't going to like me and then I'm not going to get opportunities. You see what I mean? Like these are all like different belief patterns that we have. For some people, it's if I raise my hand in a meeting and say something that sounds stupid, that I'm going to be judged and potentially. So we all have these things. So I just want you to ask yourself, what's one limiting belief that you currently have that's getting in the way of your success? That's the B, the belief. Okay. Then the second B is the backstory. Where does that belief come from? Because all of us, our belief construct, as I mentioned earlier, Jason, it's an accumulation over the years from other people that also struggled with self-confidence, right? So your parents, society, friends, family, lovers, they all have belief systems, and oftentimes they project their beliefs onto you.
Right.
Sometimes it's
Right. Yeah.
sometimes it's intentional and sometimes they're not aware of it, right? Like they might say something that's a limiting belief and you're like, no, I don't have that belief, right? Like, for example, as I mentioned, I'm getting married. So we're having a lot of conversations around like kids. And my future husband was like, well, when we start to have kids, it's going to be hard for us to like travel. And I'm like, oh, I don't have that belief system. I don't believe that kids are going to be an excuse for us to like live a great life with the kids. But you see
Right.
how it's
Right.
like it's easy to like just
Hmm.
say, well, this is what it's going to be. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to live my life around that. Right. But that's what happens to us. So that second B, the backstory is understanding like, where did that belief come from? And reverse engineering, did it come from a past lover? Did it come from my parents? Did it come from when I was bullied in school? Like, why do I have this thought that I have? Okay. The third B, which is the most important, is the behavior. What's the behavior that it's causing in me? Is it causing me to be aggressive? Is it causing me to drink? Is it causing me to overeat? Is it causing me to procrastinate? Is it causing me to not manage my time appropriately? Is it causing me not to raise my hand in a meeting and say what I want to say, even though I have something to say, right? Like that's a behavior or lack of behavior. And then the last B is the breaking. So how do we break the belief so that we can shift the behavior? And the breaking is a little bit different for everyone. There's no cookie cutter answer to it because we're all wired different. For some of us, we have like real deep rooted trauma. And in order to break it, like we need therapy, we need some like deeper levels of being able to break it. But I would say a good portion of individuals with their beliefs, the breaking is as simple as realizing that Bobby Jane in 12th grade hurt my feelings and I've been letting Bobby Jane impact me for the next 30 years. Why am I letting Bobby Jane impact me for 30 years? For some of us, it's that simple. One of my clients was in the wine industry. He's an executive. And he was going to get funding, right, for his startup, which he did. He did a great job. But in the beginning, he really struggled with talking. He's like, I really struggle with self-confidence. And after we went through this exercise, he was like, man, all I could remember is when I was 12 and Bob threw me in the trash can. He just kept throwing me in the trash can. I was smaller and I've never felt enough since then. And I was empathetic. I was like, yeah, that sucks that you were bullied and you were thrown in the trash can. But I want to ask you a question. You're now 60 years old. 60, Jason. You're 60
Hmm.
years, you're 60 years old and you've gone through your entire life living without confidence and self-esteem because somebody that was 13 years old threw you in a trash can that was probably getting bullied or abused at home. And they were also a kid. And he was like, you're so right. He's like, wow, that's like almost 50 years. I'm like, I know,
Hmm.
it's almost 50 years of like a 12-year-old that's had an impact on your mindset about yourself. And once he had that epiphany, he was like, damn, that's crazy. I got to shift that. And he was able to move past it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I do the same thing, and I learned this. I don't want to take credit for it. I learned this from a man named Peter Crone. But he said, go back to that 12-year-old self, and what would you say to that 12-year-old self? And then it's usually people are crying at, I've seen, everyone, every type be crying about that because it's like, oh yeah, and then when you talk to yourself as a 12-year-old kid and you kind of have that self-awareness of like, I didn't know any better. I was just 12. I was super innocent, and so that it creates, I think it like releases the baggage,
Yeah.
because he's 60 from 12 to 60,
Yeah.
that's
100%.
crazy, but we
It's
all do it. We all have it.
We all do it because it gets reinforced in micro levels throughout our life, right? So let's say you get bullied in high school and then you have your first boyfriend and girlfriend and then they break up with you because of something. It reinforces the not enoughism. You're like, well, now I don't feel enough again. And then you go to your first job and your leader's not very kind. And then you're like, okay, well, maybe I do suck. Maybe I'm not enough. So these little things reinforce over time the belief construct. And that's why we have to be really, really careful about what we're allowing into our brain and what we're not, right? Like even to today, people will say things to me and I'm like, I will actually verbalize it, Jason. I'm like, thank you, but that's not my belief. That's your belief. And I'll
Right.
actually like push my hand out, like, I don't have that belief. So like, that's not something I'm going to put into my brain because that's not my belief.
Right. 100%. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so good. I want to close on this question. Time flew, it's crazy. I want to close with this. And then we'll
Yeah.
do the
Yeah.
final close with your company because I want to make sure everybody understands it and gets involved. If this was the last podcast you ever did and you had to leave a statement about what true leadership means to you personally, what would you say that is?
I'm going to put something together. I would say the greatest tragedy is wasted human potential. Do not let that be your story. And I'm also going to add the phrase that it's not about you. It's not about
That's so good. Yes, I like that. Yeah, that's so true. That's where I feel most of the problems have been me being narcissistic, where it's like, I'm the leader, I have the desk, here I am. Why are you creating a problem for me? People
Yeah.
were problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to go into, for sake of time, I want to make sure that we talk about your coaching company. So is this for leaders? I was on your websites. I looked over everything. It was amazing. I was even kind of getting into a little bit. You
Thank
have
you.
some information on the courses and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Your TED Talk, all those things. How can somebody get involved? How can they be a part of this? You said you have like 20 people that help you,
Yeah.
counselors and stuff,
Yeah.
coaching.
So there's a number of levels. So basically, Jason, we have a B2B and a B2C. So we have organizations that hire us all over the world to come in and do everything from training, retreats, corporate keynotes, and coaching for their company to help elevate their performance and their culture through these skills. So through the leadership, the emotional intelligence, the communication, the conflict. And then we also have the same thing for individuals because sometimes entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, professionals that are kind of investing in themselves, they're able to come to us and do one-to-one coaching and join our programming that we have. We have an online membership. So there's various ways of doing that. We do have coaches and trainers. So if anyone is ever like, wow, I maybe one day want to work for them, you can go to our website and you can check out our coaching and certification program. But we have a ton of free resources, Jason. If you're listening and anything resonated with you, if you go to our website, riseupforyou.com, and you click the free resource button, we have emotional intelligence quizzes, we have confidence quizzes, and we have master classes for both of them that are all totally free.
It's so awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure we have all those links in the show notes so
Thank
people
you.
can be a part of that. I want to thank you personally because there's not enough of this in the world. Everybody has such a misconception of leadership, and I think it's even when you go on like YouTube and you type in leadership, it's hardly anything
I
compared to what
know.
everything else is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so, and then you've got like, I love John Maxwell. You have, all of those guys out there, producing the books and doing it. But I feel like there's a new generation that has to come along and have the emotional intelligence for what it means for human
Today.
2.0
Yeah.
now. We got what's going to happen when we have AI and all these things. So I really appreciate your work and
Thank you,
appreciate
Jason.
you taking a historical approach. We didn't even get into that. That I saw on your website. So Neda, I appreciate you and want to
Thank
thank
you.
you for it because it's more of a mission, not necessarily a work, if that makes sense.
It's for sure a mission. And I like, people always talk about retirement. I'm like, who's retiring here? Yeah, it's definitely a mission. And it's a big mission that requires a lot of people, which is why I named the company Rise Up For You versus like Ned and Astradine. Just like you said, Jason, like I love the pioneers that came before us. But if you notice, it's John Maxwell, Dale Carnegie, Tony Robbins. Like
Mhm.
it's all their name. And for me, I'm like, no, this mission is more than Netta. It's more than my name. It's a bigger collective effort from a number of people that want to evolve their leadership and themselves through these skills that are often like not thought about.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, thank you, Dan. I appreciate you being on the show.